Welcome to my first project of my new sewing channel. I've called this Yesterday Today because the premise of what I'm doing is to take the fashions of past years and see how I can work them into my everyday wardrobe. Now, my first project is probably something a little bit different, even a bit frivolous, but something that I've always wanted to give a go. I started this because as I was researching, particularly the late Victorian, early Edwardian, I was noticing that a lot of their styles are very strong silhouettes, and a lot of what gives that strong silhouette is the undergarments. And this got me into that whole researching of corsets and corsetry. And I thought, you know what, I want to give that a go. It is absolutely fascinating and something that I've not really tried before. So as I was researching online, I found a very interesting website from the Leicestershire City Council. Now, they've put an awful lot of their archives online, and particularly here from a corset company called the Symington Corset Company. And they have taken probably over 100 of their original corset designs and put them online here. And it's an absolutely fascinating history of corsetry and just the sheer variety of designs that went into it. So I was flicking through all of these and I was particularly drawn to one pattern because it seems to use quite a bit of cording, which apparently was a way of giving the corset structure without needing quite as much boning as you sometimes find in them. And I thought, well, this might be an interesting thing to examine. Is there a place for this sort of undergarment in today's wardrobe even? And I won't know that till I've tried it. So I thought, let's give it a go. Let's try and make this corset. It's from a pattern from 1894, so late Victorian. You can order these patterns in from the Leicestershire Council. To get the digital copy, it's only something like maybe £5, $5, I can't remember exactly what it is, but you can get it fairly easily. Now, I don't know if you can see that pattern on there, but that's pretty much what you then get, and they suggest that it's made for a 22 to 24 inch waist, which is not me, so I'm going to have to do some adapting of this image in order to make it work. They suggested that an A2 printout would be roughly the right scale, so I printed the original image out onto something about A2 in height, and then I thought, well, I know the waist is going to be far too small for me, but looking at the pattern, I'm probably better off actually judging it by the bust measurement. So I measured what the normal full-size pattern's bust measurement would be, then compared it to my own bust measurement and worked out the percentage difference between the two. I then took this image and put it on my computer art program. And it's very simple just to resize the image on the x-axis to stretch it by the percentage increase that I needed to give me my bust measurement. And so after I had stretched it that way, not that way, kept the height consistent, stretched it for the width I needed for my bust, I then basically divided the image into 4 quadrants and then printed each quadrant on an A4 sheet of paper to give me the A2 size. Pretty easy. That gave me a bust measurement that was roughly equivalent to mine. Remember, there aren't any seam allowances on this. I then measured the waist, and yes, it was still a little bit too tight, and I don't want to particularly squeeze down tight lace into the really small waist that may have been traditional for Victorian ladies. I'd rather have something that's a little bit more comfortable. So I then worked out, well, how much extra width did I need to give the waist measurement, and simply added it to the corset waist. Now you can kind of see that on this design there are some panels that are completely parallel. This is because this will be fully corded, and you don't really want to bring this one out. So I put all of the width extra that I needed in the waist just on the shaped panels. There are 1, 2, 3. So there are about 4 panels into which I could incorporate this extra waist width, and with the corresponding increase then in the hip panel as well. So after I did that, then I added some balance marks to help me get it together. I numbered the pieces from 1 to 8 across the body of the corset, and piece 9 was for that there. Put in rough grain line markings, because I believe a lot of the pieces, apart from the centre front and centre back, are sitting on the slight cross grain, if this pattern is to be judged correctly. So that was basically my first step. Then it's just to see, well, let's mock it up, let's grab my calico and let's see how this goes. So I'll just lay out the pattern pieces so you kind of get a feel for how the corset pieces look. This is just 1 through 8 from centre front to centre back, and then number 9 is that hip panel that sits at the front. I'm going to do this mock-up as a single layer corset for the most part, so I'll only need to cut out 2 of each piece, except for the centre fronts and the centre backs, because I will attempt to insert a busk at the front and do the lacing at the back, so I get a bit of a feel for how all of that will work as well. You can see that I'm numbering each of the pieces. It is very easy to get pieces confused, even with those various balance marks I put in, and actually putting the numbers of those pieces in really does help. I've not included a seam allowance in these pattern pieces, which is why you can see there are significant gaps around, and I'll just be able to follow then that sewing line that I've drawn onto the fabric for this mock-up, because I think with the number of seams in the corset it is very easy to just lose a millimetre here or there, and if you count that millimetre over the whole corset you can come up with quite a different fit. So drawing in those seam lines I think will really help with that. So then once that's all cut out, it really is just a matter of sewing it all together, following the numbers, following the balance lines and seeing how it's going. Now I'm putting the seams on the outside to make fitting a little bit easier, and I will just put a few minimum bones in, just using bias tape as well, just to help give a little bit of structure, help me stretch the corset out and see a bit better how it will fit, but not putting any of that over the seam lines so that I can still access them for fitting. So when you see me in the fit, it will have those bones in it. Right, so this is the first fitting of the corset, and really I am quite impressed. The gap at the back, well, is non-existent. If anything, it's kind of doubled over a little bit, so the corset is a little on the large side, but then while I will need to take it in a little bit, I won't really have to take much at all. I've got very little space, but it's all actually sitting quite well. And I'm half suspecting that cording might actually bring in some of the width of this as well. I'm not sure by how much, but I think for my next mock-up then I will actually do the cording and get a good feel of how that might influence this. So I think my next step is to pretty much leave this pattern as it is, just bring it in maybe 2 centimetres all up, which means on those shaped seams, you know, each seam just 2 to 3 millimetres just in here, just on the shaped seam, not on the ones that will be corded. Maybe just in the top here, bring it in a little bit, although I think also the shaping of the boning will make a difference with that. Yes, thank you, Laurie, you're very helpful. So I think I'm ready to try mock up 2. Let's see how that goes. So for mock-up 2, I just grabbed some old furnishing fabric that I had sitting around from an old project. It's a lighter cotton than I would use for the finished one, but I think for the second mock-up it should give a good enough idea. As I thought, I took those shaped pieces from the corset and really just trimmed off probably about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters from each of those curved seams, hoping that that will be enough to take it off. Because I wanted to be a little bit more accurate this one, I also measured out the seam allowances, as you can see there, to try and make it as accurate as possible to give me the best idea of what this is going to be like. I also made the seam allowance just at the top of the corset a little bit longer, as I thought a little bit of height may not hurt, so it will just give a bit of an idea how that goes. Because this will be double layer of all of it, I've had to cut out pretty much 4 of most, and then more of the front and the same at the front and back as before to do the insertion. And then there was the cording, and yes, there was a lot of cording, and that took me a lot longer than I was expecting. I tried to do a lot of it freehand at first, but I realised that if I pinned it in, it would be a lot tighter and more accurate. As you can see, I'm using a zipper foot to get nice and close to each line of the cord and really make it sit in there. The other thing I noticed, because most of these panels are slightly off grain, you get a little bit of stretch going as well, so I often had to stretch it out. And so yes, the cording did continue into the night. Mark was kind enough to bring me down a bit of wine while I was working on it as well. And not only that, but then I had my iPad sitting next to me with well, a little bit of, I think by now, Gilbert and Sullivan to keep me entertained and bopping along while I'm sewing the endless 34 meters worth of cording. And yes, I might have sung along a bit.
We can't like tread upon the rain we steal, in silence tread our cautious way we feel. No sound at all, we never speak a word, a vice foot forward we can simply heard. So stealthily the pirate creeps while all the household soundly sleeps. Oh, friends who blow the sea, push the navigation, take another station. There's swearing by the sea, with a little burglary.
Okay, so enough of Gilbert and Sullivan. Let's get back to actual sewing. So after getting all that cording in, it did take about a day and a half. It was then just sewing it together as before. Now for this I had to do a bit of research about how do you best sew a corset together? How do you finish off the seams? From what I could tell from the Symington company, one of the ways that they would often finish it is to sew it with wrong sides together with the seams sitting out and then covering the seams with the boning channels. So I thought, yes, I would give that a go. Yes, I have a Laurie who is helping me to do that as well. So I've sewn this with the wrong sides together, right sides out. For these corded panels, I found it worked best to use the zipper foot again to get nice and close to the cording and to keep the seam allowances about as accurate as I could as well. So the method of sewing it together was really remarkably similar to what I had done in the previous mock-up, except now I was working with double layers as well. And yes, sewing is a bit harder with a lorikeet sitting on your hand, as she constantly wants to pull at the thread, and I'm always worried she'll get tangled in it, but that's all right. We got there in the end. Laurie is happy, I'm happy, and the corset is all coming together. I think now it's Sound of Music on in the background, because why not? So yes, Sound of Music, one of Laurie's favourites, just for the whistle. But let's get back to the corset. What I didn't get video of was me putting in the boning channels. Basically for the main boning channels over the seams, I just ironed the seams over to the bits that weren't corded, trimmed the seams down, then stitch over the binding over those seams. And then it's just a matter of inserting the boning into said channels. There's also little bits of boning in some of those plain panels as well. Rather than stitching a boning channel for them, I just stitch the channels direct between the two layers of fabric. So here we are, and this is the second mock-up. Pretty much completed. Of course, I haven't bothered to finish off top and bottom edges for now. So I took in these sort of panels on the uncorded bit just by a millimetre or two, maybe on each one, but because you're talking, you know, that makes 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 12 seams. Even if you're only taking, say, 2 millimetres off of each, you know, you've suddenly got about 2 centimetres in, and of course taking the requisite out of that as well. It would have also brought it in just a little bit. Again, only a few millimetres by doing the cording on these ones as well. But between the two of them, it's given, I think, the right and appropriate sort of fit for this corset. As you can see, yes, it's firm, but I haven't really pulled in for a tight lacing kind of effect. And if you can see the back there, that is about the right sort of gap that I was going for. I didn't want too big a gap at the back. So I'm pretty happy actually with how this fit has come out. It's surprisingly comfortable to wear. I would say it's no less comfortable than your typical underwire bra. You know, I'm thinking these Victorian women knew where they were at. And certainly most of them would not have been especially tight lacing to get that really, really tiny waist. I'm sure there were some Kim Kardashians of their day that were trying for that. But for the most part, this is just giving a lovely support. I'm finding as I'm wearing it, my posture is naturally improving. You don't want to slouch because it just feels wrong. The corset just doesn't sit right if you slouch. So yeah, it's a really interesting exercise to try and to wear a corset for a while. So where to from here? I think this pattern is really quite good. It suits my figure. I think the way it's come together works really well. So I'll probably just, you know, wear this for a little while, see whether there are bits that rub, that don't bend too nicely and all of that sort of thing, just to get a bit of a feel for what it's like. But probably from here I can move to the final fabric that I'm hoping to make this out of. This will probably be it for this video. I might go and make a second video for the actual final corset, and I'll put a lot more of the how I did the cording, how I put in the busk, and all of the other putting together, finishing off bits when it comes to that next video. But it's been a really interesting journey. I have learned a lot researching all of the techniques that go in around corset making. And yeah, I highly recommend, if you want to try something different, why not give it a go? So anyway, thank you for joining me again today on my sewing journey. And if you're interested, look out, because I'll be working on the finished corset very, very soon. Okay. Bye-bye.